Hello, and welcome to the Political Paradigm Shift podcast. I am Nick, and today we are joined by a lot of people. We have Heather, who's finally back from her vacation. Chuck, as usual. Mr. Mark is back. Art is back. And
Internet
Afra.
people, what's up?
And Afra is back. Thanks for that. So tonight we have a topic. We're going to discuss various scenarios of what would happen if Donald Trump refused to concede the election if he lost. And so I have about 4 hypotheticals that I sent out to everybody prior to the podcast for them to look at, and then some other people had some other ideas. So we're going to go through that. But first, on the agenda, we're going to talk about the election and where we're at in terms of who's winning, who's losing. So we're going to do the general election, and then we're also going to do some Senate races, some pretty close Senate races. So before we started, I wrote down a bunch of stuff about the general election that I got from 538. If you guys are familiar with that, that's a website that tracks all of the polling and does its own predictable models, I guess, forecast models for who's going to win. So right now, they have Biden in their forecast. So this isn't a poll at 77 and Trump at 22%. And based on Nate Silver's analysis that I listened to recently, he said basically if polls stay where they're at, as we get closer to election day, that's going to get worse for Trump. So his likelihood of winning is going to go down. So the reason he's so high right now is based on the amount of, a lot of it's based on the amount of time that's left until the election, which is like, 30 days or 35 days or something like that. But just to be clear, I'm going to go through some of the swing states. So Florida, Biden's winning 48 to 46 in the polling average, but it's still super close. Michigan, Biden is way ahead, 50 to 43. Arizona, Biden's ahead, 48 to 45. Minnesota, 51 to 50 to 42 is Biden. Nevada, 49 to 42 Biden. And New Hampshire's 50 to 43 Biden. North Carolina's 47 to 46 Biden. Wisconsin's 51 to 44 Biden. And then Pennsylvania's 50 to 45. Georgia is 47-45 Trump. And Iowa is 46 to 45 Trump. And then Texas is 48-46 Trump. And then the surprise one is 47 to 46 Ohio. Biden's leading there now, which is a really, really good sign for Biden. If you guys remember from last election, Clinton was way down in polls in Ohio consistently. And the fact that Biden's ahead there, I think, is a massive difference from last election. As far as the Senate goes, the numbers right now are in the 538 forecast. They have Democrats having a 62% chance likelihood of taking the Senate and Republicans having a 38% chance of keeping it. The most likely scenario, 80% of outcomes say that Democrats do take it 51 to 49, which would be a great situation if you're a Democrat. And so did you guys look up states? Yes. I see Afra shaking her head, Heather shaking her head.
I was not assigned a state, so I can confidently say, no, I did not.
Chuck was not around when I
It's a crime. It's so unfair.
Yeah. So why don't we start in my bottom right corner with Afra, and then we'll go from there.
Weird. I'm on the top right corner from where I'm looking. You want Maine or South Carolina first?
Why don't you do Maine first, and then you can finish with your most hated senator.
So in Maine, Sarah Gideon is up 4 points right now in the most recent polls. And in South Carolina, as we all know, Lindsey Graham is freaking out, and he has been using Fox News as like his 24-hour telethon and getting kind of ripped for it by the Lincoln Project or Midas or whoever it was. And that's because he's usually up double digits in his races. In any Republican race in South Carolina, they're usually winning at this point by double digits. And in the latest polls, they did one inside polling where Jamie Harrison is up 1 point. So it's within the margin of error. And in another recent poll, I think Lindsey Graham is up 1 point. And Trump is currently up 6. So I don't know what accounts for the difference. Well, I have my ideas about what counts for the difference, which is basically that Lindsey Graham has never been a very popular senator with conservatives. He's always kind of seemed very middle of the road. He's gotten consistently bad ratings from conservative think tanks. And I think his voting record hasn't changed much. What has changed is that he just adores Trump. And that's kind of, or that's his public, his front-facing position. So he's really freaking out, not necessarily because he's going to lose, but he's getting out fundraised a lot, and because these races have never been this close. Especially Jamie Harrison is at this point a national name, but before this, not so much.
Okay. Also, Lindsey Graham is the worst human being on planet Earth as well. I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that. He sucks. Okay, why don't we go with to the left of Afro, which is Art. Art, did you do your state?
Oh, it looks like California is probably going to lean Democrat this time.
Your state was in California. I think we're all confident that.
Stick your neck out there, Art.
Okay, well, I mean, it's really a toss-up, but I feel like that's it's just the way the wind's blowing. Just the winds of change are in the air, so to speak.
You really dropped the ball on this one.
Okay.
I told you like 4 times what your state was, pro. Okay.
It's California.
It's North Carolina, but
okay.
I did it anyway. So in North Carolina, the 538 forecast has Cunningham at 64% likelihood to Tillis 36%, and the polling has Cunningham in the aggregate polling 50 to 47 against Tillis, which is a pretty solid lead, although it's still in the margin of error, but the margin of error isn't the same when it's the aggregate margin of error. Okay, so next up we have Mr. Chuck. Oh, wait, sorry. Mr. Mark, did you do Alabama and Montana? I can't
Why
hear you.
Why are you muted, Mike?
You're muted.
No audio coming from Mark.
Someone unmute Mark. Oh, he isn't muted.
He's not muted, yeah.
You might have to reload button.
Yeah, or just connect to computer audio or whatever device you're using.
Okay. All right.
Oh, no.
Let's bounce over to Heather then.
All right, cool. So I got Iowa. The incumbent, Joni Ernst, is neck and neck with, what's her name? Teresa Greenfield. It is in favor of Greenfield 48%, just to, I think, 47%. Like a couple days ago, they did this on Friday or something, Thursday. And I think Ernst has gone down a little bit because of her sort of repeating some of the conspiracies from QAnon about the pandemic. And people are kind of losing faith in her over that. And then also because she seems to have flip-flopped on some of her stances with the farming relief packets that need to go out to all of the farmers out there. So fingers crossed.
So interesting point about Joni Ernst is she ran as a fairly moderate candidate, and she's gone pretty hardcore full MAGA. And a lot of these senators who are losing in these swing states have done that. Like they're just on board,
yeah,
full MAGA.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was listening to part of her campaign speech, and she was sure to, recognize all of the people who showed up in their tractors that had Trump flags hanging off of them. So she's
Right.
really, really catering to that crowd right now.
Right. Yep. They vote for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, Mark, are you back? You are on mute. Right?
All right, I'm back. Can you hear me?
I think everybody can Canada kind of can hear you.
What?
Your
You're overdriven audio.
your volume's up so high.
Yeah.
The volume is too
Sounds
bad.
like
We're
it's
hearing
booming of the
ourselves
microphone.
back. Speakers back 50%.
How are we doing now?
Better.
Much
There
better.
you go, pal.
This is fascinating content.
Yeah.
All right, we're good. Hi. All right, is it my turn?
Yes,
It
sir.
is.
Yeah. Just so speak really loudly though, because your mic's kind of quiet now.
Yeah. All right. So I guess I was muted when I made this really horrific joke during Afra's presentation. So I'm a little upset about that. I just thought you guys didn't think it was funny, but I guess it's better that I just said that there's only a ladies' bugs width difference between Graham and his opponent. So that's pretty horrible.
It's what.
Oh.
Yeah. What, ladybugs are very
I'm
small.
laughing.
Not bad, not bad.
All right.
Let's go to Montana, if that's all right, where while Bullock is at 44 and Daines is at 45. That is as of, let's see, when is that as of?
Are you guys checking aggregates or are you checking individual polls?
Oh, I'm on 538. I don't know. Whatever they've got is the latest. I didn't look at aggregates there. Here, I should look at aggregates.
It's hard to find on 538. You're more likely to find the forecast, but you have to kind of.
Yeah, the aggregate for Montana for Real Clear Politics has Daines up by 1.6. That's the aggregate, but on RCP.
Yeah,
But
so
all of the individual polls have been within 5%.
Yeah, so this most recent poll, which was the Siena College New York Times one, has Daines up +1, so that's pretty close, I guess.
Yeah, that's right on it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then correct me, and then going to Alabama, I mean, it's not close, so
No.
I don't think. I think Tuberville's probably up double digits everywhere. It shows +18 in the latest state poll that I have, so not close and not surprising.
Yeah, unless you're a child molester, you're not going to win. Unless you're running against a child molester, you're not going to win in Alabama as a Democrat. Okay. And so the last two states are Arizona and who did Colorado? Oh, I'll do Colorado too. So the last three states are Arizona, Georgia, and Colorado. Arizona, Kelly, who is running against McSally, who's the incumbent. McSally already lost a race to, what's her name? Nobody knows. The other senator. She lost a race, and she was kind of grandfathered into her Senate seat after McCain passed away.
Senator Sinema was her name.
Sinema, yeah, Sinema. There you go. So Sinema beat her, and then she took McCain's seat, and now she's being beaten pretty badly by this guy Kelly, who is more moderate and well known in the state. So it's likely he's going to win, which is a +1 for Democrats. And then Colorado, you're seeing a similar situation with Hickenlooper beating Gardner pretty badly. And then in Georgia, Purdue is ahead of Ossoff. Looks like Purdue's going to win. And, Ossoff already lost that House race not too long ago, 2 years ago or something, in the Georgia special election that everybody was sort of super gung-ho about. So generally, all of this taken together, Biden is in a really good spot right now, and the Democrats are as well. So I hope nothing awful happens in the period of time from now until the election, although it could. I'm not sure what that could be. but unless polling is off by like a significant margin, it'd be highly surprising if Democrats didn't gain at least 3 seats in the Senate and they didn't win the presidential election. So that's how it's looking right now. So if you're a Democrat, you should be sort of happy about that.
I think
Okay.
lots of very awful things are going to happen between now and election day.
Right. So we're now in January 21st or whenever the president switches over. So now we're going to actually talk about some of the awful things that could happen in the interim period. Our topic is what would happen if Trump refused to concede the election, and what does that mean? So I sent 4 scenarios to you guys. I'll read them off real quick, and then we can kind of, go in, we'll rotate around the room. So what would happen if Trump refused to concede the 2020 election, and what does that mean? So the first scenario, if Trump loses, he won't immediately concede, claiming that the mail-in ballot system is rigged against him. So he rages on Twitter, challenges the results in court, loses that challenge, and eventually concedes. The second one is he rages on Twitter, challenges the results in court, wins the court battle, and Biden concedes due to some legitimate issue with voting. The third one is he rages on Twitter, challenges the results in court, wins the court battle, but Biden doesn't concede because the process was blatantly corrupt and we fall into a constitutional crisis. And the fourth one I provided was he rages on Twitter, challenges the results in court, loses that challenge, but refuses to accept regardless. And he then attempts to incite violence throughout the country to cement his power through overwhelming force, so physical force, military force, maybe having his, intense supporters sort of violently revolt. So, Chuck, why don't we go over to you, and then we'll go from there.
I like how all 4 of your scenarios include him raging on Twitter.
That's a fact.
Yeah, that's an indisputable fact.
You don't even need to put that, really. I mean, that's just a given.
And he will also breathe in and out during this period.
The sun will come up in the east that day.
That's
oh
right.
my gosh!
Yeah.
Now I'm inclined to go with your first scenario, insofar as Trump is the chaos master. He loves it when things are abnormal, when people are not getting along. And he is, he reminds me in that respect, if any of you watch Game of Thrones, Littlefinger, who always just loved to stir the pot, who always wanted everyone off of their edge when they were dealing with him. And Trump is the chaos king in that respect. And he's got 2 solid months between first Tuesday in November, 2.5 months, until January 21st, where he can, again, rage on Twitter, go to court, do this in court, what have you, because we can't have a fucking election now without bringing court into it, it seems. But he will keep everyone on edge, but I think in the end, he would settle down, particularly if we get a situation where this is a freaking blowout. I mean, if this is a 380 to 140 type electoral victory, then he's going to have very little logical leg to stand on. Not that that will stop him, but if it's a freaking blowout, then it's going to look like it is very bitter and petty, and he'll have no choice. But if it's close, yeah, he'll keep the chaos going until January 21st. And if the courts don't rule in his favor, I do believe he will leave. If not, it's going to get ugly, and his history will judge him very, very harshly, as it will those who try to attempt what amounts to a coup d'etat. But I don't think it'll get to that. I really don't.
But you think it's possible?
Sure. Oh, God, man, I'm not going to say anything's impossible these days. Shit, it's 2020. Ain't you been paying attention? Damn. I'm expecting the meteor to land any second now. No, it's anything's possible with this guy. Geez, but I just, again, most likely scenario to me is your scenario one. Him and Hall raise hell, sue, lose, and leave.
Yeah, I think just the fact that we can consider that as a realistic scenario.
Exactly. Yeah, the fact that we think that might happen is a bad thing. Yeah.
All right, Mark, you're up.
First, I would say I would see him more as a Ramsey Bolton than a Littlefinger. I don't think he has that level of cunning, but he would definitely have somebody flayed if he could. So I think I agree with Chuck. I think the first scenario is more likely, not because Trump is going to be ever motivated by anything outside of himself, and I don't know that he'll ever actually make a technical concession. In fact, I think the smart money is on not making an actual an actual concession speech. I don't think he'll ever congratulate Biden. I think he will do it, I was cheated, blah, 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 you ain't seen the last of me yet type of thing. I think that's much more likely. I think, though, that as much as the American institutions have been stretched and kicked and bruised and dented, the presidential transition is pretty strongly regulated. Yes, he will definitely challenge in court. I think there's zero doubt of that. But on January 20th, the nuclear football codes change. He doesn't have any control over that. They just change. And I think it's very unlikely that these generals that he's been crapping on for the last year and a half or two are going to do anything other than what their duty is. So obviously all the court challenges will be resolved by January 20th. I think he's gonna rage. He's gonna definitely fight. He'll sue somebody, but I think ultimately he'll go without having to be dragged.
Yeah, I think the violent revolt part really depends on who's willing to follow him, right?
Well, yeah, and the scariest thing is really what he will do in that lame duck period, because he's not going to do nothing, right? He's not going to just challenge the election. He's going to be issuing executive orders for all kinds of crazy shit. He's going to be pardoning people left and right. He's going to, take the silverware. I mean, he's going to do stuff, right? In that lame duck period. There's just no doubt about it.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, Afra, you're next.
Okay. So it's weird for me to even be on this podcast because I've been saying for the last 4 years that I don't make predictions anymore and I'm done. And I think the best line in that Atlantic piece that everybody's been talking about was the prophecy is no man's gift. And I know I've read that very recently and I could not find the origin of that phrase. Like I know I read it this summer, probably in the Aeneid or something like that. I also want to note that Trump is not a character from Game of Thrones. He's definitely Richard III, and I stand by that. He's at least, he's Thomas More's Richard III. So
I'm sorry, Afra, but there was Andrew Sullivan. Check out his blog today, as a matter of fact. He has a very good piece on Trump as Richard III. You will love it, I promise.
Yeah, and I'm going to check it out because, Stephen Greenblatt wrote several chapters in his latest book about Trump as, well, he never mentions Trump's name, but Trump is Richard III. It's very, very clear. It's implicit, but it's there. So from what I've been reading, it's our entire system of electing presidents relies on the fact that at some point within a few days of the election, someone concedes. The peaceful transition of power doesn't rely on whether Trump says that he will do it or Biden says that he will do it. And to be fair to Biden, he has said he commits to peace no matter what the electoral outcome is. But without that, there's almost no safeguards in place. Without that moment where the defeated candidate stands up and says to his supporters, it's okay, guys, go home. There really isn't anything to stop this. So I think what I expect way before Trump has an opportunity to start raging on Twitter, he'll rage on Twitter all day on election day, is that he's going to stand up in front of his supporters and say, I'm still in this. Are you still in it with me? And whether it's from the left or the right, there's going to be a good deal of civil unrest in those days because we're just not going to have the mail-in ballots counted in enough time. And the way that people behave, the first one to be able to frame the narrative is going to have a lot of wind in their sails. But I think ultimately what we're looking at is how do presidential elections now work when we have people who will not concede if the election is close on Biden's side, and in any case at all on Trump's side, because what Trump has said is that he will not agree to the results of the election if he loses, because as he said in 2016, I will concede to I will agree to the results of the election if I win, right? And what he's saying now is the only way I can lose is if it is rigged. And what that says to most people who are listening to him, and a lot of us still listen to him and don't believe him, but I tend to believe him, is that he won't. So even before it gets to the courts, as that Atlantic piece lays out, you have the possibility of different groups of electors meeting in different places, each, one for Biden, one that's going to produce a majority for Biden, one that's going to produce a majority for Trump. And we might not know on January 20th. And that gives us a situation where you have three different people, because Nancy Pelosi is now involved, who have who have some claim on the presidency. And what happens at that point is maybe no president, maybe it could be anything, but we're still relying ultimately on some group of people doing the right thing, whether it's going to be state Republicans verifying their votes, verifying the state votes, or whether it's going to be the Supreme Court making the right decision, right? But my biggest concern is that we're going to be faced by the time we get to January 20th, we're going to be faced with civil unrest, and that the one thing needful, the most important thing to anybody who's in a decision-making capacity is going to be to stop the civil unrest. It might be violence, or it might be mass strikes or something like that, and to choose the easiest path for doing that and not the path that's necessarily the most democratic. That's number one. And number two, as I suggested before, I'm worried that we have to reevaluate or kind of recalculate how these presidential elections work, because they are apparently so dependent on that moment of the concession speech.
What would that look like? What do you mean?
I think Heather froze for me.
She froze for me too.
Okay.
She was asking what would that look like for you? What does it mean? Like
what is which what?
I guess what does it look like when he refuses to concede? And there's that. I mean, is he barricaded in the White House, or?
I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows. If he has in one of the scenarios that several of these pieces lays out is that he could have he could claim that, let's say, Michigan or Florida, right, that there were major problems with mail-in ballots, and he could ask any of these states. I don't think one of them is Wisconsin, but a lot of these states have Democratic governors but Republican legislatures, and he can ask them not to certify the election and to instead send in electors for him. And there's no protections against that, as far as I understand it. Like, please correct me if I'm wrong, but if Republican legislatures decide and Republican secretaries of state in state houses decide that they are not going to send Biden electors, they're going to send Trump electors, and you have Trump electors meeting in one place, Biden electors meeting on their own in another place, and you have essentially sort of parallel elector situations, and then the Congress has to decide which one of those groups of electors they're going to listen to. And they're going to have to come up with a rationale for why they decide to listen to one group or the other. So this is like way before we even get to the Supreme Court and Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney, whatever her name is, like before this, you're talking about months of sort of turmoil, because there's nothing that says that just because the popular vote in your state went to Trump or went to Biden, that you have to send those electors. Everything is based on just how we've always done it. It's all based on tradition, but part of that tradition is the concession speech, on November 3rd or 6th or 8th or whatever day it is. And barring that moment where somebody stands up and says to his supporters, "It's okay, I lost, I'm going home," you're going to have chaos. There really aren't necessarily guardrails in place. So yeah, a blowout for Trump will end this quickly, but a blowout for Biden won't. And a close election between them certainly will not. And I think that's probably what we're looking at.
So just to throw this out there, the Senate unanimously passed a resolution to say that whoever wins the election, that, there will be a peaceful transfer of power. I know it doesn't necessarily mean anything, but they did pass a resolution. It's going to the House. It's to some degree, I mean, it's coming out and it's saying, it's obviously they did it because of what Trump said. So for what it's worth, they did do that. The other part I just want to kind of throw out there is a lot of states have different laws or rules regulating how they conduct elections and electors and all that kind of stuff. Courts would likely be involved. I would imagine that to some extent, the executives of those states would be involved as well. And people probably have all kinds of different powers depending on the state. So there's probably a lot of this stuff we don't know about. But I agree. I think if it's really close, it's going to get pretty complicated. And when it gets complicated and people don't understand, they tend to start going to the conspiratorial side of things, and that's the danger in it.
And all McConnell has to say is, yes, I said, we voted that we would that whoever wins the election becomes the president, but it's totally unclear who won in this case, because we have all of these allegations in various states, and he could, not that he cares enough to, but he could say it without hypocrisy in that case.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, but there are state laws in place as to what electors they send, aren't there? I mean, I didn't.
States have a broad latitude to decide how they want to send their electors. It depends upon whether the state has codified the fact that, yes, the winner of this state's popular vote is the person for whom, or the party for whom, electors will be selected. Because if you look at, again, we're not voting for Donald Trump, we're voting for electors for Donald Trump when we go to the ballot. So if a state has that codified, then that's one thing. But like I think Afra said, most of it is just tradition. States, we've always ordered our electors to whoever won the popular vote here in Nebraska or whatever, and that's the way we're going to do it. If it's not codified, then yes, theoretically, that scenario Afra talked about with the Democratic governor but a Republican legislature, the legislature will ultimately be in charge then of deciding which electors go to the Electoral College to cast votes for president. So yeah, it can be a potentially very, very murky situation here.
I also think it depends on the state too. So like, I think there's a difference between North Carolina and Michigan, right? The legislatures are just different. North Carolina has a historically corrupt legislature that's done some pretty bad stuff. So, I mean, that could be.
But who's going to screw it up if it gets screwed up. I mean,
Oh, we do, but the vast majority of voters will not.
You know which state is going to screw it up.
Pennsylvania.
Florida.
No, Florida.
I see what you're
Florida.
First
Well,
of all,
there's some real fear in Pennsylvania, some realistic.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But Florida is close. Our governor could not be further up Trump's ass, right? I mean, that's the most alarming state is Florida, because it's going to be close. It's pivotal, shit ton of electoral votes, and we have a kind of, very questionable governor. So I think that's the biggest fear for me. So I'm voting twice.
Don't let anybody hear you say that. All right,
Yeah.
Art, you're up next.
Okay. So I think the big misconception on this is this idea that Trump's going to like steal the election. Like he's going to show up in like a zoot suit with a Tommy gun and be like, all right, listen up here, boys. We're taking over. See? Like that's not going to happen. Like that's not,
It's not
when
bad.
people
Art.
say,
That was pretty good.
but that's what people seem to be thinking. Like, you know, Trump's just going to lose. It's going to be announced that he lost. There's going to have the electoral college votes. It'll get tallied up. And he's like, I don't care. I'm not going. I ain't going. In fact, I'm calling up my boys. We're going to get the bikers for Trump. We're going to get the, I mean, who knows, the Boy Scouts, whoever he can, you know, get to show up for him. And we ain't leaving. We ain't leaving. That's not going to happen. So like that, we can just, you know, get that off the table. The problem is like what you guys are talking about is like when you say who wins the election, people tend not to realize how complicated this game is that these like, you know, peasant farmer millennials 250 years ago wrote up for us. And by modern standards, it's really running on the honor system. There's so much that can be done. And for instance, in July, the Supreme Court ruled that you can't have faithless electors.
Right.
So, which used to be that an elector could refuse to vote for who they were supposed to vote for, even though they're a party official. The Supreme Court basically outlawed that practice and said, no, if the Republicans or Democrats send you, you vote Republican, you vote Democrat. So the practice of faithless electors is basically out. Which on one hand, regardless how you feel about it, means that if you have, let's for instance say, an electoral decision that gets down to Ohio. Ohio is controlled by a GOP majority in their legislature, which means that a number of things could happen. Let's say that Trump appears to win it first, but there's a huge backlog of votes to be counted that obviously lean towards Biden. There's assumption is that once they're all counted, Biden's going to win. So you have two problems there. One is that you get some actual Proud Boys, some, you know, people in the state that have the police go in and lock it down, or otherwise something happens where the votes are being counted where they're physically unable to proceed. And even if it's illegal, even if it's some kind of showdown like there was at that bird sanctuary some years back in Oregon, it could be something that is wrong and illegal, but it still burns up days on the calendar. And eventually, you know, the situation could get diffused. These guys could get let off and arrested and prosecuted, but it wouldn't matter. You can't get that time back. So you could have a giant backlog of votes that just because of the calendar aren't able to be counted in time. And especially with the post office already running behind, you are looking at a situation where, you know, anyone that didn't get to vote on the election day, regardless of the rules, they just might get screwed. So that could be one way where they could tip it back into a red win, even though all the votes added up would have been a Biden win. Conversely, you could get to the end of that and there could be legal challenges about, you know, irregularities and mail-in voting. It could be a lot of crap, but you could get to the very end of it and the Ohio legislature votes to not send anybody. And they're not allowed to do that. The voters might not like it, but there's no penalty for doing it. It's not like not going to do their job. And you've seen this in states sometimes where you'll see legislatures that don't want to vote, so they'll leave the state for a while. I mean, it happens in Texas fairly regularly where some, you know, podunk town doesn't want to do something and the legislature just takes off. And it's happened in big. They could just not send anybody. And if those votes are what needed to put one candidate over the top, it doesn't have to be 270 to win. It just has to be a majority of whoever actually voted. So, you know, there haven't always been 50 states. There haven't always been the same number of electors we have now. It changes depending on what numbers actually exist. So if we get to January 6th and no votes have shown up from some states, they just don't count. So there's all kinds of irregularities within the system that could wind up with Trump winning, even though a lot of illegal shit had to happen for that to happen. But ultimately, those are all minor felonies. I mean, that's stuff that individual people could affect on the ground that ultimately they might not ever get prosecuted. Even if the Ohio legislature voted and they said, hey, you know what? We're just not going to send any electors. This is rigged. This is BS. We can't trust these because they're mail-in voters and ballot harvesting and da-da-da. Trump could come on and say, hey, those guys are right. And anybody that investigates them, I'm going to send the FBI after you. I'm going to send the IRS after you. So back the fuck off. And what are people going to do then? When you know you got 4 more years of Trump as president, you've got a Democratic Party that's going to roll the fuck over immediately and put up no fight. That's the only thing that we know about the Dems, is that we can trust them to do nothing. So if we get to some point where shit actually hits the fan like that, Biden's an old man. He's not going to fight. I mean, there's no, I mean, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi. I mean, who among the actual leadership there has a millimeter of spine for that kind of fight? They just don't. They're just not those people. So what's going to happen is that there's going to be some kind of irregularities stacked up that don't amount to a presidential, Watergate scandal. It's just a lot of assholes on the ground that wanted Trump to win. They're willing to break a lot of little laws that individually don't add up to much, but could have huge effects. And you don't need to take many chess pieces off the board when the game is this tight to win. That doesn't mean it's going to work, but they're most certainly going to try. And the fact that they're going to try is terrifying, because odds are it won't work. If Biden has a large enough lead, it just simply won't work. But if it is in a scenario where there's the right state with the right legislature or the right mix of, political shenaniganry that's tolerated or laws that are not in effect as far as what that state permits, where you could have a very narrow race. It's just tipped to Trump because some guys just broke the law, but breaking the law doesn't undo the election. You just break the law so your guy can win, and then that guy wins, and then the Senate has voted that there's a peaceful transfer of power, and well, I guess that's the rules, and Trump wins, and bring it up with the founders. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, I want to just follow up on that, because I think they're already gaming how to do that. Maybe not necessarily, well, through legal and illegal means. But I wanted to say, I agree. I don't think that Trump is going to just roll in there and steal the election and say, okay, I'm dictator now, as much as he might want to do that. What worries me though is that and I heard Bernie Sanders talked about this on Bill Maher yesterday, and his answer to this was that people need to get in the streets, essentially. And I agree. That's really the only thing that's going to matter. But I also think that chaos of any kind could end up favoring the Republicans, the people who have power now. And just like what Art said, the Democrats' tendency to roll over and play nice. If there's some kind of chaos in the streets, if it's widespread enough, and the Republicans can say, look, we need to lock this down right now by all costs, a lot of people will just sort of roll over and say, okay, if what we have to do is give him 4 more years, whether he won or didn't win, in order to stop this, I'm afraid that might happen, because that's, the chaos president, that is how authoritarians take. And I want people out in the streets, because that's the only way that I could see, just like Sanders said, that we're going to have our voices heard, because there's so much in the works now to make sure that we don't, if we have a certain voice. But also, I'm concerned at how that could also play into their hands, in a sense.
Well, and just to wrap it up real quick, all you have to do is look at Trump's tax returns, which the New York Times has generously, started analyzing for us, and look and see how this guy has always operated, which is just barely within the law, or arguably not within the law, but using every potential advantage to its maximum within the confines of what the written black and white, not the spirit of the law, but the absolute letter of the law will allow. So if you look at the Electoral College, no one's ever gamed it like that, because it's always operated on basically the honor system, where we've had 2 parties, the evil duopoly, who, at the end of the day figured, well, we'll win this time, they'll win next time, but the system goes on, the game, the show must go on, and it does. And we've never had somebody who's like, no, this is the end. Like, if I don't win, nothing matters. So we need to find every possible advantage in this system, look through every rule book by every state by state by state. They've got lawyers doing this now, trying to figure out what they can do at every level to gum up the system. It's how he does his taxes. It's exactly how they're going to handle this election.
Okay, Heather?
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of that, because while all of us wanted to choose from the scenarios you were giving us, I just wanted to talk a little bit about that transition integrity project I was showing you guys in the thread, where it was a couple of Republicans, a couple of Democrats, a little bit far right, a little bit far left, and they all got together and did these sort of Dungeons and Dragons scenarios of what would happen with this transition of power. And one of the things Afra was talking about with if we get out in the streets in mad droves, to say that the integrity of this election needs to be dealt with. And, you know, we're 1 million people out there, 2 million people out there, like Bernie Sanders was talking about, and we're all being activists about this. One of the scenarios for the Transition Integrity Project was that the longer that chaos goes on, the better it looks for Trump, sort of like what we see with the current protests going on, because it looks like the Democratic Party is just full of chaos and that they can't control anything, and that the more Biden goes in there and whines and complains about things and fights back against all of the lawsuits and all of the recounts and everything that he's going to want to do in order to secure the election for him, it's just going to look better for Trump that he's more quote unquote stable, which I know sounds so stupid to us, but in the media and for wide swaths of voters out there, that's pretty much how I think that they would view that as well. So it feels like we're between a rock and a hard place, and I don't trust McConnell or any of the Senate Republicans for 1 second that they will abide by a peaceful transition. It's lip service. We haven't been able to trust them to call Trump out on jack shit. I feel like absolutely nothing. You know, we had the flip-flopping Lindsey Graham, the flip-flopping sort of Mitt Romney, and a couple of others who have sort of catered to this weird little fence walking a little bit, but I don't trust them at all. And I think that if it came down to it and Trump's able to give them more lip service and these weird sort of back deal promises, who knows what the fuck he's even promising these people at this point. But I do not trust that the Republican legislatures and the electorates would do the right thing. I don't trust that the Republican Senate would do the right thing. And that's just the election part of it. My issue is the actual election. There are groups like the Proud Boys and other Trump groups out there who think that it's their duty right now to go to the actual polling stations and quote unquote protect them. And we sort of saw this happen where they were called a protest, but they were intimidating voters. And it just really worries me, them intimidating poll workers and going in these places and, you know, coughing and sneezing all over poll workers and other other voters and stuff there because we're in the middle of a pandemic and scaring people off. I think that part will be chaos. I think that if Trump loses, whether it's by a scenario for us, I think he goes out whining. I think he does his tweets, but I think he carries his base with him. I think they're going to do a lot of weird fucking shit, and there's going to be pockets of chaos around this country that they're going to cause for other people. And there's going to be mad conspiracies because we've already seen them with other things, with QAnon and the whole pandemic hoax crap that they've got going on. I think that they're going to do the same thing about the election. And I think that they're going to think that Trump was cheated out of the election, that Biden completely cheated. And I don't foresee their weird conspiracies going away, whether or not we end up actually getting Biden in office. I think that they're going to continue to be a problem. And I do believe that Alex Jones is going to give Trump a primetime spot on his nice little blog that he does constantly, and that Trump's going to continue to use his Twitter to wield his weird idea of power with these people. So, and I think that's going to go on all the way up to 2024, no matter what happens. And I think this is going to be a consistent problem for us moving forward.
So
Yes,
But how many? Oh, go ahead, Nick. Go ahead.
No, you can go ahead. You're fine. I was going to ask somebody else.
So I understand that there are these groups who are like his very most extreme, followers, the Proud Boys and their ilk. How many of those do you think there really are, though? Right? Because we see them on the news because the news will follow them, right? The news goes where they go because that's a news story, right?
So
Are there 10,000 of them? 20,000 of them?
I don't know. I know that there's a very small portion of the American populace that actually does stockpile guns and ammo for weird shit like this, and that there's various militias out there who would probably want to show up for this kinds of thing. But the actual violence, I think, would be pockets around the U.S. But I think the rest and the more expanded thing that's going to happen is, ridiculous hoax and conspiracy theory that the vast majority of his voters will buy into. And I think that there will be I don't know what's going to happen with that, but I think it's going to be very difficult for us to get through or around, and I believe it's going to carry through the entire 4 years of the Biden presidency, all the way up to 2024, to set up possibly Ivanka Trump or whoever the fuck they think they're going to put up.
Well,
Because
and
I don't
I
think
think that's more like, I think that's more likely, right? That they'll continue to, you know, express these, you know, wild theories about how they got cheated, and, you know,
Yeah.
and, you know, and why there's a pyramid with an eye on the back of the dollar bill, you know, all those things.
Yes. Oh, yes.
I don't
saw
think
that
it's
one.
I don't think it's practical that they could do some kind of widespread poll interruption. I just don't think there are enough of them. You can do it in certain places, but you'd have to really, really, really have a massive operation to affect even a single state, you know, total vote, unless it's so razor thin. It's like Florida, you know, in Bush Gore, right? I mean, unless it's that. But it seems very unlikely that they would be able to mobilize that many people to really affect that many states.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know if it'll take that much effort, because if it is this close of a race, I mean, it's within the margin of error right now, right? It looks good for Biden, but things could still, I think that it could fuck up enough to where it could screw up the election even closer. I think that'll play a part in it.
So, Art, why don't you go, and then I know Afra had something to say too, and then I'll say my piece.
So how many Antifa do you think there are?
I
No.
mean, counting,
No, I mean like legit, like black bloc hardcore, like, you know, on the Soros, you know, shekel kind of a thing.
not many relative to the national population. Right, of adults.
Okay. So by not many, do you say the number would be closer to maybe 2,000 than it would be to 20,000?
Somewhere between 2 and 5.
I mean, it's
10.
hard to really
It's-
identify who an Antifa person is. So, I
Yeah.
mean,
No, I mean like the actual, like the, you know, not the weekenders, like the hardcore, like,
well,
you
if you count Steve, you have 2,226.
okay. So that's what I'm saying, is that when you get down to it, with the Proud Boys, with Antifa, with any of these, you know, really hardcore but very publicly visible groups, they're not very many. You don't really have big numbers. What you have, they're the very, very tip of this pyramid, as far as like the people who are, you know, willing to travel to do shenanigans and willing to dress funny. It's, you know, some hardcore LARPing with, you know, some physical exertion required now and then. Most of it's just, they're just not a thing. Like it's this weirdly overblown thing that just captures our imagination, and we imagine that there's a lot more to it. But neither Antifa nor Proud Boys or all that are numerically significant in any way.
It gets overhyped in the media.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when you talk about like a very, very narrow thing where a couple hundred or a couple thousand people could tip it, then you're in the ballpark of like a very, very small, limited type of operation that if it's a very, very, very close election, that could do it. It probably wouldn't do it anywhere else. If there's any kind of major numbers shift that had to happen in any state or any number of states, they would just disintegrate into the air. Like there's just not enough of them to do anything. So it'd have to be a situation where it's like, you know, a very, very, very tight number, which we saw in 2016. There were 3 states that were under 100,000 votes together that actually tipped the election. So in a scenario like what we just found ourselves in, potentially that actually could matter. But anywhere else, no, it's just not a thing. Now, if it got down to, let's say we get to almost inauguration time, Biden hasn't conceded, Trump hasn't conceded, the Supreme Court, for whatever reason, didn't want to get involved, which they would, and we should talk about the Supreme Court next. But if it really got down to it and there was legitimate question as far as like people literally don't know who won or lost because there's conflicting, you know, who knows what, but there's the experts can't agree, nobody can agree. There are scenarios where that little tiny trip of the triangle at the top of the pyramid suddenly becomes a giant massive base that gets really thick really fast. I mean, you're talking armed suburbs, liberal cities where they're like, oh, you silly blue states that have $1 trillion economies. Like there are huge like second and third order effects that could, you know, leave where those little extremists kind of duke it out at the top but they're on top of a very massive sets of other cultural kind of power centers where you could have huge swaths of the country that could get mobilized in the right circumstances. It's extremely unlikely, but those are the only situations that would matter as far as if there's legitimate question as far as who won the election and neither side will back down and both sides think that they're being cheated and both sides have a good reason to think that. There are like certain doomsday, like perfect storm scenarios where suddenly you have these people who are not mobilized now and would not be mobilized in a normal situation that could become mobilized. And, you know, that's really the only doomsday scenario here, which we shouldn't mess with because there's even a 2% chance of that happening. It's really not worth messing with. But, you know, those are things that on paper actually could happen. And we should, you know, give that a little bit of consideration, just not much because they're extremely unlikely.
Okay. Afro, do you have something to say?
I was just raising my hand as part of the group who's stockpiling weapons for a situation like this. But I also wanted to say I live in Lower New York. I have never been to a protest where, and I don't know if they're Proud Boys, I don't know who they are, where people didn't show up as counter protesters and behave in threatening manners towards the people who were protesting, no matter how small of a protest we were or how big. Actually, the one time it didn't happen was in the New York City Women's March, which was so big that you didn't even see any counter protesters. And I do think that if it's targeted, which it's being targeted because they're trying to recruit poll watchers, and at last count it was tens of thousands of people to show up to polls. And where are they going to go? They're going to go to places where it's close or contested. So there are, like what Art was saying about the pyramid, they're not all Proud Boys, just like they're not, you know, they're not all Antifa, but can they be activated through Facebook groups and things like that to show up at the right place at the right time? Admittedly, Long Island is not the right place and pretty much never the right time, but they're still here, right? If they're here, they will show up and they will have the Trump flag and on the back of their car and Obama burning an effigy or something like that. So you don't need to have card-carrying members of the Proud Boys or Patriot Prayer in order to create situations that are going to scare people away from voting. And I think the best way to handle that is just to let people know, hey, you might see this at the polls. I saw it when I went to vote in 2016. I've been voting the same precinct my entire life, and I have never even waited online. And I waited on a 3-hour line at this precinct while people were carrying on and saying things that were actually they're not allowed to say. I mean, they were campaigning, people standing in line and playing Trump campaign ads and going, Trump, 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 right? You weren't seeing Hillary Clinton supporters doing it. You were seeing Trump supporters doing it. Might have been a different situation in other polling places, but in my personal experience, there were people who were trying to intimidate voters or at very least campaign for Trump while standing online inside of the polling places. So it doesn't need to be people who are part of this club necessarily. They just need to be motivated or activated by what they're seeing on social media, and they are, and they have been over the last 4 years. I don't see any reason to think that this is going to that this situation has diminished since then.
Right.
So that's more of what I was saying, and I think that they also have the pandemic as a weapon too, because they don't care about it. So they will show up with no mask on, and they will cough and sneeze on people in line.
Okay.
Good. Build that herd mentality.
Mentality, like Trump said.
So, just very briefly, I think a worst case scenario is you have a close election. I think it gets complicated. I think that there's a lot of different things that could happen. I think regardless of what happens, the left and the right are both going to claim to some extent that something was rigged if one or the other loses. I think that's sort of just inevitable.
Something will be rigged.
So I also, yeah. So I also think that I think you guys are a little panicky, and I don't want to be a dick. I'm not trying to be a dick.
I'm just glad you're saying this on tape so we can play it later. This will look great in December.
Please do. My predictions tend to come out truer than most people's. So I don't think that the country is as screwed up as you say it is. I think we're in a bad place. I think we're in a very bad place. I think different pockets could definitely erupt in violence. There's certainly a possibility for that to happen. But I think people are so hyper vigilant right now about voting that you have all kinds of stuff going on in various swing states, all kinds of groups, all kinds of watchdog, groups just kind of watching over everything.
Nick,
And I
want to interrupt for 2 seconds.
Yeah.
That was the other thing I was going to say. The other thing that's going to be pretty radical about this election is all the people that do show up on election day. And I think that's going to cause some problems in and of itself, or the really, really long lines. I actually think that's going to be a scenario.
Yeah. And I also think that the leaders of our country are very aware of what's going on. And I don't think that anybody, I get you guys don't trust the Republican Senate. I totally hear you. I don't either. But I don't think anybody wants there to be violence. And unless there is like a situation where you have some pretty significant evidence that something got screwed up, I can't see people, outside of really hardcore MAGA people supporting any sort of pushback against the results of an election. Or it has to be super close. And then maybe you have like a Florida type situation that you did in 2000, and you could say that something shady happened in one of the state legislatures, like in North Carolina or Florida or Ohio or something like that. Go ahead, Chuck.
I was just going to say one thing that's kind of undergirding all of the anxiety that we're having heading into this election is the increased prevalence of early voting in 2020. I know Virginia, this is the first year we have had no excuse early voting and no excuse absentee voting. And certainly I have no problem with more people being able to cast ballots or making it easier. But number one, I've always seen elections as a point in time survey. And I don't like the idea of being able to vote, 2 months out or a month and a half out or something like that. It just, no particular reason. It just strikes me as not the way it ought to be. But the worst thing that's going to happen, I fear, because of this, it's going to take an awful lot to manually count these votes because we're having, many times more this year than we've had in the past. Very, very possible that we're not going to have but a small percentage of them counted midnight November 3rd or midnight morning November 4th. We're going to go to bed without knowing who won. We're going to get up the next day. They're still counting the early votes in Nevada. They're still counting the early votes in Pennsylvania. They're still counting the early votes in Michigan. Now, all of a sudden, media attention focuses on these 3 or 4 states that are still counting early voting, and the election is up. It's 260 for Biden, 248 for Trump, whoever wins Pennsylvania, and it takes days and days and days. And people are not going to wait that long before they get a little bit antsy and a little bit rioty, I don't think. And one of the problems is if people don't have an end to the story, they will invent an end to the story very quickly before the end is verified and comes out in fact. And when people are given a chance to fill in the blanks, they're going to fill in the blanks with the worst possible scenario, and they are going to react. We as a nation are used to having a pretty damn good idea who won. We went to bed election night, 2000 notwithstanding. It might be several days before we honestly know, because of the early vote tabulations taking a while, before we honestly know who won this thing. And of course, we've been discussing multiple scenarios tonight whereby even after that happens, we may not really know what's going to happen. But yeah, I think early voting is going to take an already volatile situation and complicate it quite a bit. And I hope it doesn't happen, but I fear it might.
Why wouldn't early voting actually make it less complicated?
Oh, you got to manually count the votes, and a lot of the rural precincts do not. They have to do it 1, 2, 3, 4. They don't have machinery. And
are you in Tennessee, Virginia, or DC, Virginia?
I'm right at the southern border with North Carolina.
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. Those areas, which by the way are reliably red, you know.
Yeah.
But
no, actually, city of Danville is very blue within the city I live in, but everything else is red.
But anyway, I mean, I think honestly, early voting is more of a solution than a problem. I mean, yes, they have to hand count those, but I mean, you know, they'll hand count them. You know, it's not as tricky as mail-in, where, you know, there's a lot of questions about validity and, you know, all that nonsense.
And there's also the specter, Mark, that they are allowing in some, or at least trying to allow, I don't know how this was settled, but in one scenario I read, they were trying to allow mail-in votes that were postmarked up to 3 days later than the election, which seems to be a recipe for disaster. If you are allowing that, I can send a letter from here to Roanoke in 3 days. In that case, there would be very little to prevent me from, you know, sending something after Trump declares to win Virginia or whatever. Oh no, I'm voting for Biden. Let's send it into the mail. And if that is the case, they would have to accept it. That just seems very.
Do you have a link to that? Because I just did a quick Google search. I didn't find anything.
Yeah.
I was going to say, is that new?
Yeah, I mean, the California website popped up first, and it has to be postmarked on or before Election Day. And I looked through some others. I didn't see anything.
Well, the reason I remembered this was because they mentioned the date November 6th, which is my birthday, and I remember that. Yeah, that to me was just asinine, and I hope that was just one of these wild-haired state legislators that nobody listens to anyway. But anyway, I'll try to find that for you, Art. But yeah, I don't know. I've always seen elections as point-in-time surveys. Who are we voting for at this moment in history? And the lead-in votes for, and I'm all for making it as easy as possible for people to vote, and certainly want to cut down on the long crowds after was mentioned on Election Day. But I don't know. I just got a bad feeling. That's all.
Okay.
I mean, it would be one thing if we had the infrastructure in place for everyone to, you know, take the day off and everyone vote. And there was enough poll people to manage it all in one day, and we just had like a national tradition for it. Right. But as it is, it's infrastructure. It's intentionally limited to benefit certain demographics and disadvantage other demographics, and that's just kind of what's up.
So anyway, to just summarize what I was going to say, because I got exactly 15 seconds to talk. I
mean, you're the one running the show, man. You want to talk more? Talk more.
Yeah, really.
I don't want to talk more.
That ain't our fault.
I want to finish what I was saying and then hand it off to you guys. But I just think there's something psychological about, I think most of us, not everybody, and I'm not trying to pass judgment, watch the same sort of left-leaning media sites over and over and over, and they constantly kind of push out some of this panicky propaganda. There isn't a lot of people reaching over to the other side, listening to other things. And so you guys have these worst case scenarios that you kind of replay in your head. And
I'm sorry. I know you wanted to talk. I just got to jump in real quick. I listen to more like Tim Pool, Dan Bongino.
I'm not talking about that.
Scott, that's Adams.
That'll make you panic more. Those
okay, but like
conspiratorial. I'm talking about reasonable.
No, those are mainstream right sources. Like,
they
who's a regular right source now? That like, who are you talking about?
Yeah, I got you. But those aren't what I'm talking about. But the point is that I just think that sometimes that can feed that panic, and that when you watch this kind of stuff and you're sort of in tune to all of it, like you guys are, like you're hyper focused on it, that you tend to catastrophize a little bit more than is reasonable. That's it. So that's my position. Afra, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I wanted to, I have to agree with Chuck. I think if there's not a period on this election process by November 5th or so, people are going to put a period on it. They're going to do it whether that's rational or not. ideally, I also agree with Chuck that it should be a decision, and maybe this is just me being old-fashioned, a decision that people make on election day. However, I understand the reasons why we can't, and a good amount of that is because there have been voter roll purges. There are all kinds of things to keep me from voting. So you know what? I'm going to vote on election day. I'm going to go to my precinct. I'm going to stand in line for as long as it takes, and I'm going to vote, even though in terms of Trump, it doesn't matter at all what I do. But I think the problem is that in that case, I trust my precinct, I trust my state that my vote is going to count. I would not necessarily feel the same way if I were in Ohio or Pennsylvania. So people need to be able to vote early now, check to make sure their vote was registered, which you can do online. I wish I had the website ready, but I don't. Check to make sure that I was registered to vote, that I wasn't purged from the rolls, that my vote was counted, that my ballot got in okay. People are more worried about that than ever, in addition to the COVID thing, which I think is actually helping the case of people who are worried about being purged. The last thing that I wanted to say, because I don't watch TV, so I don't really need to defend myself from being apocalyptic thinker or whatever it is. The last thing I wanted to say is that people on the left are really, really good about getting out and protesting when we don't like something. And we need to be just as good, if you're listening to me, the left, at getting out on election day and getting that vote in and making sure that it has counted. Because the issue is not that it could be close. The issue is that the counting could be stopped before it gets close, or the counting could be stopped before an obvious winner is declared, who is not who Trump or your local precinct or your state legislature wants it to be. So it's not a matter of when all the votes are counted, if it's close, what's going to happen. It's a matter of when are the voting counts going to stop, because people either want an answer right now, or because the people who have the power do not want it to be closer, or they don't want it to be more obvious that somebody has won that is not palatable to them.
Can I just piggyback real quick? That's a really good point. And in my own county, that's happened before. So as activists, we get together and volunteer to oversee the people who are counting, to make sure that that cart over there and those ballots in the back room over there are all counted. But I'm kind of worried with COVID and the pandemic and everything, what the county offices are going to allow and how that's going to look this year for citizens to actually be able to go into these rooms and supervise that the counting's being done honestly. So who knows? And I bet it's different state to state and county to county.
Okay. So Art, did you want to say something about the court? You had mentioned it earlier.
Oh, so I think it's funny that Trump is packing the Supreme Court with these Federal Society judges, because, you know, you want to talk about the long game. You know, those guys are on a much different level than what he is. I mean, he lives day to day, wakes up in the morning, you know, history basically restarts every day with Trump. These guys are thinking about like the next 30, 40 years. And what they don't care about is Trump. Like when you get down to it, they're looking at, you know, basically a demographically changing America where there are certain structural advantages in like rural states that have given them a slight edge in the Senate, which is slipping, but still existing. And they're in a position now to set themselves up to be a counterweight for what's going to be an increasingly democratic and increasingly liberal, legislature. So if they play their cards right, what they could be is a counterweight over the coming decades against liberal legislation that they'll be able to sit back and then from, you know, on high, just strike it down as unconstitutional and keep going. So it is incumbent upon them not to do anything stupid that's going to cause a backlash. So right now, when everyone is freaking out that, you know, they pack the courts, we need to come in and raise it to 11, to 13, to 15 justices. That's the last thing that the Federal Society wants. And the people that worked so hard to get into this position don't want that. And if what that takes is for them, when this election shenaniganery comes down, for them to say, well, you know what, Mr. Trump, we looked at it and we don't know, it doesn't look like you won. Sorry.
Yeah.
What that would do would be to defuse. I mean, certainly the rank and file GOP would be furious, but I mean, those guys don't have any money. Like, we're talking about like the actual, like the big donor GOP people that actually like run this country. And those people don't want to lose their Supreme Court, majority that they've worked decades to get. I mean, the effects on business, environmental legislation, regulation, business regulation, gun regulation, there's all kinds of regulation that's going to make its way to the Supreme Court that huge business interests are finally positioned to be able to sweep down because they've finally got the court packed. They don't give a shit about Trump. Like, he's just some passing guy who's not going to be here in 4 years anyway. They're going to be here for 40 years. So if they can hold on to the Supreme Court majority, they're going to hold on to it. And if that means throwing Trump under the bus, they're going to throw him under the bus because that's what their objective is. And this idea that, oh, they owe Trump a favor because he hooked them up and now they got to hook him up. They've got lifetime appointments. They don't need anybody anymore. Like, at this point, they're there for their own reasons and for the reasons the Federal Society picked them in the first place. So, and I realize that sounds conspiratorial, but it's not. Like, that's why Trump used that list. He went to them for the organization and enterprise that they built and the funding and like political power behind it. So that's the reality there, is that Trump made a bargain with these people and they are going to, in their own way, pay up, but not in the way that he's expecting. Like, they're not going to throw the decision in his favor if they think it's not going to work, or if they think it's going to cause a backlash that in 4 years causes them to lose because suddenly President AOC comes in and now we've got 25 Supreme Court justices.
Yeah, Trump made a bargain, and they're holding all the cards, and
they are now, right?
They have no reason to do that. I think Trump's reliance on the court here is naive, and it's reflective of his, fundamental ignorance about how basically everything works. And really, the panic over the Supreme Court, if anything, is hyperbolic. But the rest of this, I'm not sure that it is. I'm not sure that it is. I've been hearing for years that don't call Trump a fascist, and this is all hyperbolic. Oh, he's not going to do that. He's actually going to be like a center leftist, and hasn't worked. I actually have found myself to be right about most things when it comes down to it. So that's my final word.
I think you guys are a little bit cynical. I do think that it's not all about self-interest. I think there are principled conservatives out there. I know people don't want to think that, but I think that the justices aren't necessarily, especially people like Gorsuch and Roberts, they have an institutional interest, right? In the fact that they want to protect the institution of the Supreme Court.
I mean, that's literally what we just said.
Yeah, I mean,
well, right, but on the other side of that, I also think that they have legitimate ideological differences in terms of what executive power is, and they're not just going to do stuff for like money interest, which is sort of what I was hearing, right?
No, it's kind of the same thing. It's just that their ideological interests are pro-business and for the beliefs
That's what
sorry.
I think that they would just do it because they didn't think it was right.
Well, it's the same thing. Like, have you ever talked to free market guys? Like,
I don't understand what your point is. I think what I'm trying to say is that if there was like a problem in the election where unless there was something where there was evidence to show that something nefarious went down, that you're not going to have people like Gorsuch, even Kavanaugh, or even Amy Coney Barrett just vote for Trump or vote in favor of Trump or rule in favor of Trump simply because they're party affiliated or ideologically affiliated in that moment, that they would do it based on principle and not based on whatever it is that you guys are saying that their other motives are.
They won't vote for Trump because they feel like he does, that they're employees of his because he appointed them. Right. They're going to do it based on their principles. Their principles could also be what sounds in paraphrase like there's nothing mercenary, but it's still I think we're in agreement on is that the Supreme Court is not going to protect Trump just because Trump appointed them, or just because some of them were appointed by Republicans.
That point
These
is
people have a lot more at stake, and they're looking at this. They're taking a much longer view of this than he does, and Trump does not really look outside of what's good for Trump.
So I agree with that part of it. I don't agree with the corporate relationship that Art went on about. I don't necessarily know if there's necessarily any evidence to back that up.
Well, that relationship is ideological. It's not political. So if
that's why they're Federal Society judges. Like, maybe you should look into that.
Look into what? Look into what?
Into why Trump picked a list of 25 Federal Society judges when he ran in 2016 and said, if you vote for me, I'm going to appoint.
Weren't picked because of their corporate affiliations. They were picked based on their judicial record. I mean, you're assigning some sort of conspiracy to it. It's not a conspiracy.
You just are. You need to get educated on, like, take a couple classes and then get back to us. Like, I don't even want to. It would take 20 minutes to explain this to you.
Well, that's kind of a shitty thing to say. Number one.
Okay, but
it doesn't show. You're not showing me any sort of evidence. You're just making a claim, and you're assigning some sort of motive to a bunch of people, and you don't have any evidence. And then when I challenge you on it, you tell me to read up on it instead of providing the evidence. So if you
I just told you in 2016 when Trump ran for.
Based on what?
I'm bringing this up just to refresh your memory. When Trump ran in 2016, one of the things he did was he had a list of 25 Federal Society judges that he said, if I get elected president, I'm going to be pulling names off of this list, which he did. He's been pulling names off of that list and putting them on the Supreme Court.
Yes,
so
I agree with you.
The reason that this list...
show that there's an affiliation between corporate America or the Republican...
No, I don't think that's what they're saying. I think just that they will protect those moneyed interests.
Right, because that's how you get on that list in the first place.
But based on their ideology, not because somebody's being paid or somebody's...
Yeah, I'm not saying there's a payoff, like they're getting money under the table. Like, these people are ideologically aligned.
Something like that. It's just that the Federalist Society has a vision for America that is corporatist. I'm not saying that is necessarily a bad thing, but that is also, more importantly in this case, much, much broader than Trump and him protecting what, I mean, seems to me to come down to like his own money, his own ability to be whole and solvent. And I think that Trump is the one who really misunderstands this situation if he thinks that they're going to rule as though they were his employees. He thinks that he appointed a board, and he didn't. He appointed people who have an ideology that he decided to court. But that ideology is not, I'm not judging it as a moral thing. I'm saying that the Federalist Society is going to recommend judges who are going to be pro-business, who are going to satisfy the corporate donorship of Republicans. That's all fine, okay. But they're not going to turn around, with, I believe, the exception of Kavanaugh, because I think he would do this out of revenge.
But the way that it's being described is if it's this nefarious thing that's going on, that it's this.
But it's no more nefarious than like some drug company giving money to some politician and then saying, "Oh well, Pfizer gave them, $50 million. They're probably going to vote with Pfizer." Like that. That's all that we're saying, is that there are relationships that are built here. That's how you get on these lists. That's how you get on the Supreme Court. Is it
organization that picks several judges, high-profile judges, who are known throughout the conservative movement as deciding cases in certain ways, and they pick those judges, and those judges get on a list, and then they get nominated by presidents or whatever. Right? That's the extent of it. There isn't necessarily some sort of corporate fucking conspiracy behind that necessarily. I understand what you're saying.
It's not a conspiracy. It's just how donors work.
I know how donors work, but I don't think that is guiding their decision making.
But do you think that
And that's
ideology-
incredibly naive if you actually believe that. Like that's astoundingly naive. Like you don't think that like donors influence politics?
I think donors influence politicians. I don't necessarily think that everybody on the court is as motivated by these donors that you're saying they are. I think a lot
But
of people,
putting that aside, do you think that they have ideology or no?
I get your point, Afro. I understand what you're saying, but that's not the way that it was articulated initially. And I just want to set it straight that this isn't like a goddamn fucking movie. Like, calm down with the conspiracies. All right.
Nothing pisses me off more than being told to calm down. But
It actually calmed me right down.
Relax, little lady.
Fine, I will.
okay, I'm gonna go get one of those weapons I've been stockpiling and see if murder over Zoom is actually possible. I'm coming for you first, Mark.
I don't blame you.
Oh,
By the way, I think it's kind of interesting that in this day and age, conspiracy now always means wrong and crazy, right? So, like, that's how we use the word. Oh, that's a conspiracy, meaning we dismiss it. Conspiracies happen every day.
oh, absolutely.
They're just not as grand and magical or whatever as people think. My dad, who was in the intelligence business his whole life, said that to me. He said, Mark, conspiracies happen. They happen all the time. There was definitely a conspiracy for 9/11. It was a conspiracy of radical Islamists crashing planes into buildings. That was the conspiracy. So conspiracies happen all the time. So it kind of bugs the philosopher in me that we use that term now to mean definitely wrong.
It was a conspiracy for the New York Times to get Trump's taxes. Like, however they got it, probably wasn't legal.
Yeah, you're probably right.
I mean, that's a conspiracy that they got their hands on it. I mean, they conspired with people to do something that they probably shouldn't have.
Together in secret to accomplish something.
There's a conspiracy every single day in the halls of Congress. Every day.
So, right. So
That's just how political things work. So,
my problem with the conspiracies that I'm talking about are the more extravagant ones. The ones that are driving progressives a lot of the time, the more extreme ones, the ones that are driving, the more extreme ones, not you. You guys don't have to take what I'm saying personally. And
Okay.
yeah.
Oh, I do. Every day.
Anyway,
Nice to know your
just to back up here, I'm not trying to be a dick. I realize that I phrased that poorly. I should have been a little bit more generous. However, it's just a function of how politics work in the United States as far as how these power centers are created,
But
what
I
wealthy
understand
interests,
that. Like,
and that's all.
You
I'm just
don't have to articulate that to
all
me 1,000 times. Like, I get what you're saying.
okay.
And I think there's too much emphasis put on that. And I think what happens is that people in our country right now are like super conspiratorial. Everything's a conspiracy. There's these sort of, outside entities that are controlling our movements, right? That's how it's gotten. It's gotten like out of control. And I just think that sometimes the way that judges make decisions is based on, and we can reference a lot of recent cases that weren't necessarily deciding in the way that the Republicans wanted them to, for like Gorsuch and Roberts and people like that, for other reasons, right? There's institutional reasons, or there's personal ideological reasons that actually conflict with the modern conservative movement or the Federalist Society, even though they were nominated or put on a list for that reason. And I think that we need to, yes, that's true.
There are nearly 1,000 judges. You're saying that these 25 that randomly happened on this list?
No, I don't think they randomly happen. I think that they're put on that list for a reason, but that doesn't necessarily mean that every single thing that they do from that point on is going to be to appease those people. And the mere suggestion that that's true, it to me is just feeding conspiracy theories.
No, okay, but that's not
very unlikely that that's true. And I just want to reiterate that my point, and what I think Art's point is that that's not true, and that there's no way that there's been a conspiracy to pack the court with people who will make Trump a dictator.
Okay.
And that his reliance on that
yes, exactly.
is quite naive, actually.
I don't disagree with that, no.
I
By the way,
actually have a slightly different take. Sorry,
go on.
Mark, let me just spit this out. I don't think the Senate cares that much about Trump. And in fact, it might be that they do pack this court appointment and that they could give a fuck about Trump and they don't back him up when it comes down to, like, if it goes all the way to the Supreme Court over this election, they're just like, yeah, fuck you, dude, we're done. Because the Republicans do play the long game and they did want to pack the courts. And hey, they've got it. And this may very well be their chance to get.
I think you froze, Heather.
Yeah.
What a way to freeze, though.
Yeah.
So I don't
I'll
think.
say this, go ahead, Mark. You had the floor before me.
So I do think that obviously the Federalist Society selects judges based on past performance, relying on them to act in a way that furthers whatever you want to ascribe to the Federalist Society as their motives. There's no doubt that that's why they're on that list, right? I do think that we've seen definite instances where once the Supremes get on the court, now the chains are off, right? And sometimes, shockingly, they do what they want, right? Because now the Federalist Society has no hold on them.
Right.
And they may care in some abstract way, I don't know. But I think we've seen examples of justices that didn't go the way we thought they were. Now, the Federalist Society, I think in part, was formed to make sure that didn't happen again, right? That you don't get a guy who we thought was super conservative in terms of
Justice Kennedy.
That's
Kennedy,
correct.
Exactly.
And even before Kennedy, who was the one before Kennedy?
O'Connor.
What's that?
Sandra O'Connor.
Yeah, Sandra, but I think
Souter.
it was. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, Souter. There you go. That's who I was.
Studer, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the main focuses of the Federalist Society is to find people they don't think that's going to happen with, right? So they try to find people who are truly ideologically aligned with them. Although it's tough to tell anymore because they lie so much and they campaign for the job in such a way that they write their opinions as their resume to get on the court. So it's
and they don't even necessarily need to lie. They just, everybody's kind of now in the modern era, like they say the same things. Like, I haven't looked at it very
right.
yet. I'd have to see what the case looks like. And it was like, yeah, Souter is one of those people that Ross Douthat, or however you say his name, was complaining about last week, because it was like, you shouldn't be upset that we're going to liberals shouldn't be upset that we're going to replace RBG with a conservative, because we should be upset about the fact that we nominated Kennedy and Souter and they turned out to be liberals, right? Because this is what the court does, because this is what the court can do. And honestly, that's the way it's supposed to work, right?
I'm sorry, Senator, I'm unfamiliar with this Roe v. Wade case. Can you summarize it for me?
Exactly.
Not
But
considered
their
that.
answers aren't necessarily wrong, right? Because each case has its own specific features to it. And they would be being irresponsible if they just said, well, I would decide this way.
Of course.
Because you can't, you don't really know, right? But there's
Which
a
is
good
what
argument
Fortas
that
did, and he was
poorly decided case. I mean, I agree with the outcome of it. But.
It's probably better for national stability that they, during their hearings, come on and say, I haven't thought about this very much. I mean, I think Kavanaugh made a big mistake when he basically said, I will get revenge for this. You know, and he shouldn't have done that. And whatever the issues with Kavanaugh were with the accusations of sexual misconduct, whether that was true or not doesn't really matter. It was kind of his behavior was, and I think will historically be seen as breaking from what's been a precedent for a few decades, and not, you know, most of the judges have or the judges who became justices have been a little bit more guarded about what they would do. And Kavanaugh was, for the most part, but when he basically came out and said that he was looking forward to revenge on the Democrats, that was probably a bad look.
Oh yeah.
I'll say this, I've been kind of just letting you guys roll here for a while, but I've got to say, as a libertarian, the judicial appointments of Trump have been probably my favorite part of his presidency, insofar as, best I can tell, he is largely nominating textualist, originalist, however you want to call it. Yes, for Gorsuch, maybe not so much for Kavanaugh, evidently yes for Barrett. And Art made a very good point in that this will serve as an effective check for the coming decades to a populace that is increasingly becoming bluer, slowly and slowly as we go along here. Very quickly, if not in a few months, the White House is going to be blue. The House is going to be blue. The Senate may very well be blue. And you know me, I'm very much a fan of divided government. I don't want one party to control everything. So yeah, the only thing this will do is that, for years, Democrats, liberals, whatever, have increasingly relied on the Supreme Court to do what they could not do in Congress in terms of, passing law that was large-scale changes. It's clumsy to try to do it in Congress. You got 535 different opinions you have to get through. In the Supreme Court, you only have 9 people you have to convince. And so, yeah, increasingly the High Court has been the avenue by which significant changes were made. Now, those who want to do that will have, hopefully go back to Congress, and maybe Congress can reclaim some of this power that they have gleefully abdicated over the past few generations. Unfortunately, I think what's going to happen is that this power is going to be shipped to the executive branch, like so much else has happened in the past few decades. And so Congress will still be just as impotent as they have been, and the executive branch will be more powerful now that the left at least sees the Supreme Court as something to avoid rather than something to embrace. Go ahead, Mark.
But is that who Biden is? Is Biden the strong alpha dog,
No, I'm talking beyond Biden. I'm talking
okay.
years from now. Yeah.
Because I would say Biden seems to me more likely to work with, he's a compromiser. He's he's a backslapper, that type of thing. So I think it's unlikely that if we have President Biden, then he will expand. I think it's unlikely he'll expand the powers of the president. Anything's possible because once you get there, who knows? But and I agree with you. I hope that the Congress reclaims not only some of its power, but some of its responsibility, right? I mean, do your fucking job. You get paid a nice salary. It would be nice if you produced a piece of legislation other
when's
than
the last straight budget they approved? How long has that been now?
Obama, I think.
Yeah,
Not
I mean,
even
and we're talking
Obama.
middle Obama.
Yeah.
Chuck, what is your position on court packing?
I don't like it, just out of norms. I think you start to take away the legitimacy of the court when you add, if you're, say, Democrat in this case, add 4 members or whatever, make it a 13-member panel, throw 4 Democrats on it. Right now, at the very least, I think the Supreme Court at least has a high rating of trust from the American people, as much as we're going to trust government. I think you turn it into just another political arm if you try to pack it every time you don't get your way.
So
I think it lessens their authority.
Because you're right. The Supreme Court, more than almost any other institution, I think the most, has the highest rating of trust from the American people, according to Pew. Do you think that trust is going to be eroded based on the behavior of the Republicans in 2016? The hypocrisy. Do you think
it will be a little bit, simply because, again, this reaction that we've seen from Trump, again, it's just, of course, luck of the draw that he's been able to appoint 3 members to the Supreme Court. And yes, with Kavanaugh, even though I think he was treated very shabbily, I think the way he responded was way over the top, and it turns the Supreme Court it makes them look less august. If Barrett breezes through her confirmation hearings, and I think she will, I don't think the Democrats are going to push back too much, quite frankly. It'll restore some of that. But yeah, if you get to the point where anytime your party is in the perceived minority on the Supreme Court and you just add a couple of members and appoint them, then the Supreme Court loses a lot of its leverage. It loses a lot of its neutrality in the eyes of the people, and it becomes less effective for the long term. And right now, I mean, at a time when trust in government is correctly at an all-time low, it would be nice to have at least one section of government we could look at as the people with at least some kind of confidence, even if it's not really warranted.
Does the Supreme Court need popular support, though?
No, I mean, no, but in terms of, yeah, I mean, nothing needs popular support once they're in place. I mean, particularly with, Congress, they need popular support, but only within their districts. But yeah, you're right. I mean, once you get a lifetime appointment, that's that. There is a check, of course, potential impeachment for Supreme Court justices. There's that. But yeah, I see what you're saying, Mark. They are less subject to populism than any of the other branches, but still, in terms of their overall effectiveness, that appearance of neutrality is important, but it would matter less with the Supreme Court. I know what you're saying. It does matter, though.
Okay, that was a lively debate. So, anybody have anything they want to say? A final word? Heather, do you have a final word? No.
No, I think I'm good.
Okay. All right, guys. Well, I appreciate you all coming, and we went about 2 hours, so this was a very long show.
Hey, Art, can you just do this real quick? Just do that. Just do that. There you go. You just punched Nick right in the head. That was awesome. From
He punched Afro.
And surprisingly,
I live to serve.
it didn't hurt.
one Brady Bunch panel to the other one, you totally took him out. So,
Wow.
and Nick, I mean,
Yeah.
punch back. You can go back the other way. All right, I'm done.
All right. Thanks, guys.